It's been a foregone conclusion that the Chicago Bears would eventually fire Matt Eberflus. But after a big divisional win over the Minnesota Vikings, is there still a chance he could still save his job this season?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. On the show today, we look at the big picture for Matt Eberflus, how important that win over the Minnesota Vikings was, and whether these last now 6 games of the season could still be enough to save his job, especially if he could make offensive coordinator Luke Getsy a potential scapegoat. Say you fire him, but Eberflus gets to stay and pick another offensive coordinator with, his defense is playing pretty well. We'll go through some of those dynamics. I'd also make sure we touch on where, despite some of the things the Bears are doing better, there's still some very real coaching concerns here that continue to lead to the conclusion that Matt Eberflus should not keep his job. Real quick, before we get into it, a couple of quick shout-outs. Yesterday was the first day of Spotify Wrapped coming out for those of you that listen to Locked On Bears on Spotify. It shows you what podcast you've listened to the most over the course of the last 12 months. And we heard from some of the everydayers that tune into Locked On Bears that tweeted me on Twitter, and I wanted to give them a shout-out here. Shout-out to Christopher Gates at Gates_CK. Locked On Bears was number 1 in his top podcasts on Spotify. Also, shout out to at GD312 Chicago. His Twitter name says Mr. Hanky. We were number 2, even though we listen every day. Hey, I'm just happy to be in the top 5, man. It's such an honor to have you listen to me so much that we end up in your top 5 listens over the course of the year. Love absolutely hearing that from everybody that we've heard from so far, including at Falls54, FOLS, on Twitter. This was many years in a row as his number 1 go-to. Really appreciate you tuning in. And then also I saw from Mikey B at Hoodie Mikey B on Twitter. Came in number 2 in his Spotify Wrapped top podcast. If we're in your Spotify Wrapped Locked On Bears, give us a tweet. You can tweet at Locked On Bears. You can tweet me at CoxSports1. Also want to throw in a quick shout out to Owen Ahlstrom, who is the fiance of one of my good friends' sister. I know he's an everyday who tunes in the podcast on his way to work. So shout out to Owen as well. And shout out to all of you who are tuning in today, whether it's your first podcast or your 1000th podcast. And send us your Spotify Wraps. I want to see who's listened to the most Locked On Bears. But let's get into Matt Eberflus here, where, the win against the Minnesota Vikings felt like such a key win for Justin Fields to be able to finish that game with a game-winning drive at the end of the fourth quarter. Matt Eberflus to get his first divisional win as a Bears head coach. And all of a sudden you look at it, the Bears are 4-4 in their last 8 games. After starting 0-4, they're 4-4 in the last 8, and they've won 2 out of their last 3. They seem to be turning some kind of corner and playing a lot better. And throughout that stretch in particular, the defense really leading the way, really playing well. Of course, against the Vikings, they only give up 10 points. Against the Lions, they picked off Jared Goff 3 times and gave the Bears a lead all the way up until 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They were shut down of this Detroit Lions offense for the majority of that game. Obviously, really holding down the Carolina Panthers before that. We've seen them dominate against the Raiders and keep the Bears in against the Saints pretty well. It's not been perfect defense, but over the last handful of 6 or 7 or 8 games or so, this defense is playing really, really well. And that's Matt Eberflus's domain. Yes, the offense has struggled on and off there, but there might be enough opportunity for Eberflus to distance himself from that a little bit and say, hey, my defense is playing a lot better, and my defense is winning us these games and keeping us in the games that we don't end up winning, and see, like, I deserve another shot because my defense is working. And then you start to look ahead to what's still left with 5 games, 6 weeks still on the schedule. Can he do well enough over that stretch? If he wins more of those games and gets this team closer to 500 even down the stretch, does that conversation about Matt Eberflus start to change? Because right after the bye week, you have the Detroit Lions, who the Bears were beating for 3.5 quarters, really until about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The Bears were in control of that game. So all of a sudden, Detroit at home feels like a winnable game coming out of the bye week. Then you're on the road at the Cleveland Browns, who have a very good defense, but don't have a quarterback. They're starting P.J. Walker at this point because Dorian Thompson-Robinson is hurt and Deshaun Watson's out for the season. So, like, the Browns are a potentially winnable game. You've got the Arizona Cardinals, who are 2-10, I think, and might be full-blown tanking by that point of the season, late December there before Christmas. And then the Falcons are, okay, maybe a decent team, but not a playoff caliber team, not as good as the Lions, we wouldn't think. And then on the road at Green Bay in week 18. Like, not that I think the Bears could run the table and win all 5 of those games, but you just beat the Vikings. If you beat the Lions after the bye, that's your first back-to-back wins in the Eberflus era, and another huge divisional win. Maybe you beat the Browns, maybe not. You almost certainly should beat the Arizona Cardinals, so you start to get to, you add 2 more wins, you're up to 6 wins, and then maybe a Falcons or a Packers or a Browns get you to 7 wins, and, well, 7 wins is not a great season. It's not too far off from where we might have expected coming into this year. Like, we knew this team wasn't going to be a Super Bowl team this year, and so could Matt Eberflus stumble his way into earning another year and saying, yeah, listen, my defense played really, really well, and this team got better, and see, we were playing so well down the stretch at the end of last season. Bring it all back, and let's see if we can pick back up where that is in 2024 and really get this ship going. Like, see, we just needed time. We needed that patience, and now everything is working, so let's keep that thing going. Don't fire me. Let's keep this thing rolling, and then, maybe, just maybe, the Bears will say, well, but hey, the offense was still only doing this, and things need to be better. All right, well then, how about I fire the offensive coordinator, and we'll try and improve the offense that way. Like, let me keep my job because the defense is playing so well, but maybe the offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, can be a little bit of a scapegoat there and say, yeah, we'll replace him, and that'll be sort of forgiving my sins as the coach and keep my job as the head coach and run things back for next year. We'll take a closer look at what's been going on with Luke Getsy and how that plays in with Justin Fields, but also Matt Eberflus's loyalty to his coaching staff and how that might work as a potential scapegoat next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks puts you in complete control of your chance to win. You're not going up against other players' lineups hoping that you have the best one. No, it's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks sets a stat projection for all the players, and you decide whether they will get more or less than their PrizePicks projection. So, for example, I picked DJ Moore to have more than 4.5 receptions against the Minnesota Vikings. I picked Danielle Hunter to have more than 0.75 sacks against the Chicago Bears last week. You pick 2 to 6 players, and you can win up to 25 times your money. It's super easy, and it's a lot of fun. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. It's an extra $100 to play with at prizepicks.com, promo code LockedOnNFL. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. It feels like with all the disappointment the Chicago Bears have had this season and a lot of failure and ugly, bad losses along the way, it feels like it would be hard to bring everybody back and pretend like everything is fine. I don't know, like does winning a few more games at the end of the year forgive all of the previous sins of the, mistakes and really bad loss to the Denver Broncos in week 4 where they blew it and, really kind of blowing it against the Detroit Lions at the end there and being embarrassed by the Chargers on Sunday Night Football. I mean, there's been a lot, and we'll get into some of the bad here in a little bit, but it feels like it would be hard to just say, yes, everything is on track the way we want it to, bring everybody back, and we're full steam ahead with how things were. But you could still keep Matt Eberflus and, fire Luke Getsy. Because when you look at what's going on with the Bears right now in these last couple of games, like things went well against the Lions, but certainly against Minnesota, you couldn't get into the end zone at all. You had 4 interceptions on the opposing quarterback, and you got field goals out of it. You started drives near or past midfield, and you couldn't get into the end zone. And I think the specific thing about that is that you still felt like your quarterback was generally playing pretty well. And obviously the defense is a part of this conversation, the opposing defense. But we're not looking at these games going, man, Luke Getsy has nothing to work with here. Like, oh, the quarterback is struggling and the receivers aren't any good and the O-line's not any good and there's no running backs, right? Like the Bears offense seems to have enough pieces, right? It's not perfect. They could kind of use a little more in terms of weapons, and the offensive line has its ups and downs here and there. And certainly Justin Fields is not a perfect quarterback. Yeah, there's flaws, but the offense is generally Fields is generally taking care of the ball and playing decently well. They've been able to run the ball fairly successfully all year. The offensive line has settled in and is playing good enough, it has felt like, for the majority of the year. DJ Moore is obviously a great weapon. Darnell Mooney feels like he has some untapped potential there. Cole Kmet is having a decently productive season here. The Bears have stuff to work with on offense, and yet you get 12 points against the Vikings. And even 2 weeks ago against a really bad Carolina Panthers team that just fired its head coach, all you could get was 16 points in the game. One touchdown. I mean, I get it. Tyson Bagent was starting, so I'm not gonna hold the Tyson Bagent era against Luke Getsy too much in that regard. But it just felt like there have been too many times when this offense has struggled to fully figure it out and to feel like you're putting Justin Fields in the best position to be successful, to feel like you're putting DJ Moore in the best position to be successful, to feel like you're putting Darnell Mooney in the best position to be successful, and to feel like this offensive line and the running game, there's just been so many times when you're just like, man, what exactly is Luke Getsy doing here? And a lot of times it's stuff where it's right idea, but just wrong path, wrong execution, where against the Vikings, you're going to need to call some screens, but maybe not 12 of them, and maybe not 3 screens in a row on that one drive, or back in the Buccaneers game in week 2, where they called that same screen pass 3 in a row and had the pick 6 off it. It's just things where it doesn't feel like your offensive coordinator all the time is putting your offense in the best position to succeed. And so, you can make a pretty strong argument for moving on from Luke Getsy, but then does that absolve Matt Eberflus of his blame in all this? I mean, he picked Luke Getsy and he, assembled this coaching staff and has stood by it and is involved in offensive meetings and stuff. To me, it's awful convenient to just kind of blame it all on Getsy and have Eberflus keep his job to keep moving forward. I can also understand or wonder whether Matt Eberflus would fire Luke Getsy. He talks a lot about culture and defends his staff, even as they've had all sorts of staff issues, and we'll get into that in a moment here. I do want to talk about that. Eberflus seems like a pretty loyal guy with his coaches, and would he fire Luke Getsy? Certainly, if the Bears came to him and said, you either fire Luke Getsy or you're gone, push can come to shove there, but would he fire Luke Getsy on his own fruition or say, no, let's run it back because they believe it's working? I mean, I get from the standpoint of it sure would be nice to give Justin Fields that continuity, to have the same offensive coordinator and the same offense for then it would be the 3rd season in a row from, time that Eberflus got here. And even from a head coaching standpoint, just to have the general organizational continuity for 3 years in a row instead of, turning over after a couple of years, as the Bears have been doing a lot lately. I just wish the continuity was better, right? I wish you were getting a 3rd year of a good offensive coordinator. But that's the thing with Luke Getsy is there's times when it looks good. He's not, I wouldn't call him the worst offensive coordinator in football. I mean, Matt Canada seemed to claim that title when he got fired by the Pittsburgh Steelers. But there's some moments where it feels like the worst offensive coordinator in the NFL, and there's other moments where it works. And you're seeing Justin Fields play better right now. And isn't that really all that matters? Or what matters the most is that Getsy is getting better play out of Justin Fields now than we've seen for the majority of his career. This is the best stretch of football that Justin Fields has played, and Luke Getsy has been the offensive coordinator for that. And yet, as Fields has still played well, it feels like the offense as a whole has not. And when your quarterback seems to be doing well, and other guys in your offense individually seem to be doing well, but collectively, your offense is not doing well, That would seem to be as clear of an indicator of the coach, the offensive coordinator, the one coordinating all of those individual pieces. If they're individually doing a lot of good things, but not being coordinated to do well, that kind of falls on your offensive coordinator there. So then, I mean, is there anything Luke Getsy could do to keep his job? Like if the Bears, is Luke Getsy in a similar boat with Eberflus, where it's like, if the offense plays better over these last 5 games and Fields keeps playing well, like are Fields and Getsy tied in that way, tied together, where it's like Fields is kind of fighting to make sure that his future is still with the Chicago Bears. So if Fields plays really well over the stretch, does that keep Luke Getsy's job? Whereas if Fields struggles, then Getsy goes, but Fields goes too? Like, are those guys kind of inextricably linked in that way? I mean, that's what's so interesting to me about this final 5-game stretch of the season. Is like, there is still something at stake there, but I just wonder if it would be convenient to let Luke Getsy go and have Matt Eberflus save his job by kind of putting the blame on the offensive coordinator and saying, my defense is playing well, don't look at me, look at the offensive coordinator, and then get somebody else in there, which might break up some of the continuity there, but might be a better offensive mind or a better system for Justin Fields. I mean, it's a tricky spot, and that's where you have to wonder, like, can these guys still save their jobs? And I still feel like the answer should be no, right? There's 2 different distinctions here. There's trying to predict what the Bears might do, which to me is up in the air. And then there's, what would I do? What would you do? What would we do if we were running the Bears? And that's, fire this coaching staff. There's a lot to still not like about this group. Even though we can enjoy and celebrate the wins, we can also make sure like we keep in mind the flaws from this coaching staff and from this Bears team that still make them very fireable, almost regardless of how the remainder of this regular season goes. We'll kind of refresh ourselves on some of the stuff that has really gone haywire throughout this season and the stuff that still is causing problems for this team next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by DoorDash. DoorDash is here to deliver all of your favorites right to the comfort of your own home. Whether it's during game day, you want to have a meal, a snack, or your groceries delivered, and you don't have to go to the grocery store to deal with it or go to the restaurant to pick it up or go out into the cold this winter when that winter breeze hits you. When you step out of the car, boy, there's been a few times when I should have just stayed home and ordered it on DoorDash, because with DoorDash, you can still support all of your favorite local restaurants. You look around the Chicago area, there are plenty of great ones on DoorDash, whether you're talking tacos, diner, breakfast food, gyros, of course, deep dish pizza, a bunch of different places on there in Chicago, all from local restaurants. So you're still supporting them while staying in the comfort of your own home. And you're going to save a little bit by using DoorDash and using our promo code. You can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter in our promo code LOCKED23. That's 50% off up to a $10 value. You just got to spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter that promo code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets when you place any winning $5 money line bet. So you bet $5 on any team to win, especially during the bye week. Might give you a little something extra to cheer for when your Bears aren't playing on Sunday. $5 on any other team. Not only will you get your $5, the winnings from your $5 bet, but FanDuel will give you an extra $150 in bonus bets just for getting that win right. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Their app is easy to use, and they got a wide range of betting options that you can use those bonus bets on for spreads, over-unders, player props, you name it, not just football, but across the sporting landscape. So check out FanDuel.com/lockedon to get your bonus bets and wrap up this NFL season the best way possible. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. As much as we're finding more to like lately about the success that this Bears team has had, and you got to give the coaching staff credit that the players have started playing better, and they deserve credit, some credit for that. To me, it's hard for what we see on the field over these final 5 games to be enough to outweigh everything we've seen over the previous, what would that be, 24 games, 25 games, the previous season and a half under Matt Eberflus. That sometimes, as we add more time to things that have happened in the past, they soften a little bit in our brain. It's like a recency bias, or the reverse of recency bias, where the longer time heals all wounds in that regard, where, okay, maybe it doesn't seem as bad in hindsight, or because there's some time to it than it felt at first. But like, can we not forget that, like, defensive coordinator Alan Williams left this team mysteriously and abruptly, and we still don't really know exactly why. And there's still unsubstantiated rumors out there about criminal involvement or police involvement in some aspect of what had happened there. And the Bears really tried to brush that one under the rug pretty successfully, because no one's talked about it for 3 months or 2 months or however long it's been. Like, that's still a pretty big deal. Like, that's a really bad reflection of your coaching staff, especially when you add in the dismissal of the running backs coach for some sort of HR internal issue. Like, one time, okay, you could say maybe it's a fluke, maybe there's something going on with Alan Williams. Okay, like, maybe we can excuse that as a weird thing, but maybe not a bad sign of the coaching sort of culture and philosophy. But 2 coaches, now we can start to maybe raise some questions. Or now we can, and we've talked about this in the past, and we don't need to rehash the whole thing, but like, let's not forget this staff has lost 2 coaches this season to rather unknown reasons in things that don't seem to be good, right? Doesn't seem to be your tip, like you might think, if a coach has like a death in the family or like a legitimate health issue, which I guess Alan Williams claimed that, but it sure doesn't seem that way. Like, this seems to be like actual problems that ultimately, whether the head coach knew about it or had a ton of power over it, the buck still stops with him. And when it's happened twice, it's like, that's real tough here. Just generally, we also see communication issues in terms of speaking clearly to the public, to the fan base, to the media, and not being able to really get points across fairly, and as a result, creating controversy for this team and how they talk about Fields and Tyson Bagent, and how they've talked about a number of different situations where we just can't get a straight answer out of Matt Eberflus, and it makes everyone else's jobs on the team tougher. It creates more controversy, creates more distraction for this team, because your head coach can't put those away, right? He can't just clearly say, here's how it is, that's it. Instead, we kind of get this like, oh, Fields is doubtful, but he's not going to play, but he could still play kind of thing that just causes problems. And similarly, in the way that he talks, we get accountability issues where we often hear the coaching staff talk about how the players need to be better. And they talk less about how they need to be better, and how it ends up feeling, it's not directly throwing the players under the bus, but it's not shielding the players from public blame. And again, like, if I were a player in that locker room and I heard the way that Matt Eberflus and company talk about the players after some of these losses, it feels to me like they're blaming us, if I'm the hypothetical player here, more than anything. When a coach is supposed to go out there and, to the public, whether he believes it or not, always say it's your own fault. Whether it is or isn't, doesn't matter. Your job as the head coach or any of the coordinators leading the organization is to protect your players, take the blame off of them, and be the sort of shield from criticism and from the public. And Matt Eberflus really doesn't do that well at all. Like, you got to come out there and say, yeah, I got to coach him better. We got to put him in a better position to be successful. We have to prepare them better. We, as the coaching staff, have to do this better. Shout out to Larry Dyer from Bears Talk Underground, who made a great point when I was talking to him yesterday. Like, to his credit, Matt Nagy was really good at that. Like, not to say that Matt Nagy is the shining example here, but like, Matt Nagy was really good at saying, yeah, we got to coach him better. We got to put him in a better position to be successful. This is on us, the coaching staff, and not the players. And it's felt like so often this season with Matt Eberflus, it's like, yeah, we the coaches, we're doing right. The players got to execute that better. They got to learn from that. They got to be in the right, they got to do this, they got to do that. And it's less like we got to do them better. It's more like they got to do them better, which is, again, like, not helping the team. You've seen, even like lately, against the Vikings, you saw it a little bit, but especially against the Lions, Matt Eberflus's much improved defense gets really conservative down the stretch. Super prevent soft defense lets the Lions drive down and score a couple times in the final 4 minutes and lose that game. We've seen it in multiple games this season where they really take the foot off the gas and really let the other team climb right back into these games, and they've blown a couple of these games. This defense has. For as well as they've played, they've blown a couple of these games. The defense also was pretty terrible against the Chargers, missed a bunch of tackles mid-season after having played a couple of really good games before that. And they played decently against the Commanders, really well against the Vikings, really well against the Raiders, and then the Chargers, they turned back into a pumpkin. So can we trust that the Bears defense is fixed and is good to go and is going to be great from here on out? Or is there still room for vulnerability here? And do we trust that the hits principle is working? Because that's the whole philosophy here, right? That's the whole thing Matt Eberflus hangs his hat on is, was it hustle, intensity, turnovers, and smarts or whatever it is? And when they're missing a bunch of tackles, doesn't seem to be quite the hustle and intensity they want. There were plays earlier this season where it felt like guys weren't hustling. Guys were kind of loafing out there, and they're supposed to be monitored for their loafing and supposed to be, held to this higher standard. They're supposed to be tougher, more endurance, and all these things better than their opponents. And I don't know that we're really feeling that. I mean, turnovers we're finally starting to see, but isn't that just a result of, getting a guy like Montez Sweat added in there from your general manager, getting fully healthy from, all of the young players in your secondary, again, acquired by your general manager, and, your free agent linebackers playing better, kind of again, acquired by your general manager, and guys settling in after so many moving parts early in the season, now settling in. Do you give Eberflus credit for that, or is it just pretty good players? One of the questions I ask myself when I think about Matt Eberflus is how much is the coaching and how much is the talent? Could another defensive coordinator come in and be really successful with this group? What is Matt Eberflus doing as a defensive coach to make this defense better? And what do we point to schematically or play calling wise or player usage, personnel usage, coverage wise, blitzing wise? I mean, can we point to a lot of that's Matt Eberflus right there making this defense good? We did see them blitz a little more against Josh Dobbs and use it in yes, there are some things that you can point to as okay, Eberflus has switched up his coverages and has blitzed a little bit more, and he has grown, right? And I think that's something we have to keep in mind with coaches in general is coaches are not static. Just like players develop and grow and get better and worse, coaches get better and worse, and there's room for Eberflus to get better and worse, and there's room for Getsy to get better and worse, but it just doesn't feel to me like Matt Eberflus has from a coaching standpoint, really done anything special as a defensive coordinator. Players are playing better, and he probably deserves some credit for player development, but schematically, doesn't feel like the Bears are doing anything special there that's putting these guys in a great position to succeed. They're just getting better players, and those players are playing better, and that feels a little bit more like the GM than the head coach. So I still think the best decision is to fire Matt Eberflus, to also fire Luke Getsy, let the next head coach come in, build his staff out, and let that staff decide what to do with Justin Fields. But we'll see what the Bears do. And maybe these last 5 games really do have enough sway to swing that either direction. I kind of feel like it shouldn't, but maybe it will. Certainly we'll keep close tabs on what Matt Eberflus and Luke Getsy do over these final remaining games after the bye week. So follow along with all of our coverage. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Really appreciate you making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We love our everydayers that tune in 5 days a week that send us your Spotify Wrapped as well. If you haven't done that yet, show us where. If you're not listening on Spotify, that's okay too. I listen on Apple Podcasts too. I don't listen to podcasts on Spotify. I'm not here to endorse Spotify, but if you happen to listen on Spotify, send us your Wrapped. We'd love to see it. And even if you're not on Spotify, if you're still an everydayer, we'd love to hear from you as well on Twitter at Locked On Bears, Locked On Bears Facebook group, you name it. We love it. Really appreciate everyone who tunes in each and every day. And I hope that in addition to all the fun we have on the podcast, you also get an opportunity every day to bear down.